On my 75th birthday, in the very house I'd designed with my own hands, I overheard my daughter, Anna, whisper behind a closed door, "I hope this is the old woman's last birthday." I froze. Those words weren't a dagger. They were a gunshot, a shot that made me realize I was being hunted by my own flesh and blood. But instead of crumbling, I decided it would be the start of my fight to reclaim everything. Before we dive deeper into this story, tell me, where are you watching this video from? Drop a comment below. I want to know if you're on my side in all of this. I entered my 75th year with a party I should have refused, not because I hated parties. In my younger days, I knew how to laugh, how to raise a glass, how to sit in a crowd and feel valued. But this feeling of being a stranger in my own home, it made me feel like someone forced onto a stage, made to replay an old role, even though no one believed the lines anymore. This house, I'd drawn the first blueprints myself, back when I worked at the City Design Institute. No one, back then. I was a new widow, raising 2 young children, both mother and father to them. Every brick, every stair tread, was my blood and sweat, wrapped up to give my kids a home. Something I'd lost when the only man I ever loved passed away at 40. And now, the space I'd built with every fiber of my being was being redecorated by Anna, my eldest. The old sofa was tossed out, replaced by some cream-colored Korean-style set. The family photos no longer hung on the staircase wall. In their place were abstract paintings I couldn't for the life of me understand. I was like a guest in my own house, an uninvited one. Michael, my youngest son, was the one who organized this birthday party. He'd called me all week, begging, pleading, saying, "Mom, 75 is a big deal. We have to do something grand. We're so happy you've lived this long." I stayed silent. The way he said "we're happy" didn't sound like joy. It sounded like he was counting down the years I had left. But I still nodded, not because I was stupid, not because I didn't see how people change, but because I wanted to know what they were up to. Guests arrived, offered congratulations, and raised their glasses. I sat in the middle of the party room, in a pale lavender silk dress, lipstick on, hair in a neat bun. I was the main character, yet I felt like a stiff, smiling wax figure in a play of false pretenses. I saw Mrs. Peterson from next door. I saw Tom, Michael's childhood best friend. I saw a few of my old colleagues, their eyes dim now, their steps unsteady, but they still came. Only Mr. Davies, my closest colleague from my youth, wasn't there. He died last year of liver cancer. At times, my heart sank. Everyone I'd once been close to, once trusted, gradually disappearing. All that was left were my children, the ones I'd birthed and raised, now becoming stranger than actual strangers. I went to the kitchen for some water, passing by the study. The door was slightly ajar. I was about to close it when I heard Anna's voice, quiet, but clear enough. "I hope this is the old woman's last birthday." A pause. Then Michael's voice, low, as if trying to restrain himself. "Yeah, when she's gone, it'll all be ours. This house, the land in Willow Creek, the savings accounts. How are you thinking of splitting it?" I stood there, feeling like all the blood had been drained from my heart. I couldn't breathe. My legs trembled, but I didn't fall. I slowly turned, walked back to the party room as if nothing had happened. I smiled. I raised my glass. I was still the mother of 2 good children, in front of all our relatives. I looked at Michael, the boy who used to be afraid of ghosts, who'd crawl into my bed to sleep with me until he was 10. I remembered the time he fell off his bike, his face bruised and swollen, and I held him all night, crying like a child. Myself, I remembered when he went off to college. I cooked a whole pot of chicken soup, took a bus from Chicago all the way to Ann Arbor just to see him eat breakfast. And now, he was the one who wanted me dead first. I sat in my room, looking around the house, every corner, every window, my heart an empty void. I was once a respected architect. People used to call me Iron Eleanor for my toughness, my determination, unafraid of headwinds, unfazed by the times. And now, a 75-year-old woman, hunted by her children like diseased prey. I heard murmuring from the living room. They were probably cleaning up, dividing gifts, counting envelopes, and I, their mother, lay here, silent, listening like an outsider. I looked up at the ceiling, the place where I'd once sketched the first lines with a technical pencil. I thought, if this is my last birthday, then at least I won't let them rob me of this last bit of life. For the first time, I didn't want to be a gentle mother anymore. I wanted to fight for my right to live, my right to choose, my right to die. If I had to die, on my own terms. I quietly pulled an old notebook from under my pillow. Inside were copies of property deeds, bank account statements, old house blueprints, and a letter I'd written 10 years ago. The letter began, "If one day I can no longer remember who I am, this is proof that I once lived, once fought for my children. But now, I wasn't writing for them anymore. Now, I will write for myself. For the first time in 75 years of being a woman, a mother, a wife, an architect, I would rewrite my life story, not to tell anyone, but to remind myself that my life wasn't over. I was still alive, and I would start fighting, starting tomorrow." After that birthday party, I felt like I was living in a glass house. Every step, every breath, I felt someone watching, not with eyes of concern, but with eyes of anticipation, waiting for me to collapse, waiting for me to disappear. I started to suspect, not just my children, but my own body. My hands trembled. Every time I poured water, it splashed out of the glass. My vision blurred. My heart raced as if someone was chasing me. At first I thought, well, I'm old. Everything's bound to weaken. But this feeling, it wasn't like normal aging. It was insidious. It wasn't natural. I suddenly remembered recent changes, things that seemed small, but now connected, formed a pre-staged play. Before, for my monthly checkups, I always went to Dr. Logan's clinic. He'd been my doctor since my hypertension started 10 years ago. He was thorough, asked detailed questions, and never prescribed anything without a clear explanation. But for the past few months, Michael had been taking me to see someone named Hayes. His good friend, he said, a new doctor, very good, modern methods. I wasn't comfortable, but he said, "Dr. Logan is old, outdated." So I relented. The medication was different too. The boxers didn't look the same. Labels were stuck over. Some parts looked scraped. When I asked, Michael laughed. "It's imported medicine, Mom. You're so behind the times." Then he also told me I didn't need to carry cash, because we're managing your accounts for you. Mom, we'll take care of anything you need. At first, I thought they were being considerate, afraid I'd overexert myself. But now, I am scared. Every time I wanted to buy something, I had to ask permission. The money I'd earned my whole life now felt like someone else's. I opened the medicine cabinet. I looked at each box. Some were open but still full. Some were new, unlabeled. I picked up a pill. It was opaque white, not like the ones I usually took. I didn't remember being told about this one. Something felt wrong. A chill ran down my spine. I put the pill back in the box, my mind suddenly flashing back 2 years long past. I used to sit in major departmental meetings in Chicago, back when I was head of the design department. So many men's eyes on me, the only woman, standing in the middle of the room, talking about blueprints, budgets, technical solutions. Kept a stoic face through 3-hour meetings, never letting anyone see me falter. And now, I was letting my own children lead me by the nose, quietly and cruelly. I looked in the mirror, a wrinkled face, but my eyes still held a spark. I wasn't dead, I wasn't senile. I had to check everything myself. I couldn't live lulled by strange pills, sweet words, and expectant gazes. That night, I sat alone in my room, the soft yellow light on, the window slightly ajar, the fan whirred, the sound of distant traffic drifted in. I opened the pill bottle. Instead of taking it, I put the pill in a small box, hidden in my vanity drawer. Every day, I would take it, but actually, I'd save it. I needed to know what they were giving me. I also started to note down every symptom. Today, I had heart palpitations at 8 a.m. after taking the pill. Yesterday, I was dizzy at 10 a.m. I wrote by hand, my script still shaky, but each stroke was a step towards reclaiming myself. Every morning, I pretended to swallow the pill, drank water, then smiled, and talked as if nothing was wrong. Anna was busy with work, rarely checked. Michael only visited on weekends. I used my alone time to find my old rhythm. Slow, steady, alert. I reviewed old blueprints, read old technical books to exercise my memory. I started practicing breathing exercises, meditation. I was starting over like a wounded soldier, stitching her own bullet wound in the middle of a battlefield. I used to think old age was for resting. But now, I knew old age could also be the time for the fiercest battles, fighting against betrayal, against conspiracy, and sometimes, against your own blood. I was no longer the gentle, unconditionally trusting mother. I was Eleanor Vance, the woman who had once designed a city, survived a war, lost her husband, and raised 2 children to success. I couldn't let myself be slowly, silently killed by a poison called false filial piety. I would find the truth. I would know what I was taking. I wouldn't die as easily as they thought. This play, if they'd cast me as the victim, they'd have to rewrite the script, because I was rewriting every page myself. I still remember that afternoon clearly. The sky was gray, a light drizzle falling. The house was as silent as a dry well. I sat at the dining table, my fingers toying with the ginger tea Maria had just made. The ginger was warm, but my heart was cold. I looked at her, a woman in her 60s, more gray hair than black, her back slightly stooped, but her hands and feet nimble, a part of my life for nearly 20 years. She wasn't a stranger. More accurately, she was part of this family. But after everything that had happened, I couldn't fully trust anyone anymore. I said it straight, no beating around the bush. I think Michael is poisoning me. Maria showed no obvious reaction. No shock, no denial. She was just silent for a moment, then nodded. Slowly, she pulled an old cloth bag from under her chair, took out a small worn-edged notebook with a yellowed paper cover. I took it, opened it. Inside were neat lines of handwriting, dates, names of pills, their shape, color, and notes beside them. Today's pill box is different from yesterday's. Has a strange smell. Michael said not to let her know. I looked at her, my heart aching more than when I'd heard my 2 children plotting to divide my assets. I asked, "How long have you known all this?" She didn't look at me, just replied, "A long time, since you changed doctors." I thought it was strange, so I started keeping notes. I didn't dare say anything because I was scared, but I never betrayed you. I looked closer at the notebook. Each word she wrote, steady, careful, seemed to be sending me a message. I wasn't silent. I was just waiting for you to be clear-headed. She told me Michael paid her each month, not much, but enough to live a little less precariously. Her job was to report on my health. Was I confused? Was I sleeping a lot? Was I asking the same questions over and over? And most importantly, to ensure I took the new medicine prescribed by Dr. Hayes. I asked, "So, did you switch the pills?" She shook her head. "No, I just pretended to give you the medicine. Some days, I hid the old pills you used to take and let you drink plain water. But I never let you take those strange pills. I only pretended, so I wouldn't lose my job." I sighed. Not because I was angry with her, but because I pitied her, a poor, lonely woman, forced to choose between betraying the person who had helped her or betraying her own livelihood. I remembered years ago, when Maria's daughter, Rosie, finished high school. She had the grades for the School of Architecture, but no money for tuition. Maria was crying while hiding her resignation letter, planning to borrow money so her daughter could attend. I found out, and didn't let her quit. I called an old colleague, presented Rosie's application, and secured her a full scholarship. Not with cash, but with my reputation, the only thing I had in abundance back then. Maria remembered. I knew it. And that was why today, she chose to side with me. From that moment, we became allies. Silently, I told her, "I need a phone. Don't let Michael know. A simple one doesn't even need the internet, as long as it can make calls." She nodded. 3 days later, she gave me an old Nokia phone. Tiny, hard keys, scratched screen, but when I dialed a number and heard that familiar long beep, I felt like I'd come back to life. I called Victor, the only man I'd ever wanted to be with after my husband died. But because my children were young, I chose to remain single, to care for them, and so I had to leave him. Victor's voice came over the phone, hoarse but warm. "Hello." I smiled faintly. "It's me, Eleanor." A short silence, then he said, "Which Eleanor is calling me, after all this time?" I replied, half joking, half serious. "The Eleanor, who isn't dead, just has been silent for too long. But now, I need an ally." I hung up, my hands still trembling, not from emotion, but from the feeling of having support. I wasn't alone anymore. They thought I was isolated. Wrong. I was just quiet. Now, I have an ally. From here, the game began, and I would make the first move. I sat on the wooden bench on the porch, the phone in my hand, my fingers trembling so much I misdialed 3 times. This hand had once held a pen, drawing hundreds of designs, precise to the centimeter, every curve exact. Now, just wanting to make a phone call felt as difficult as climbing onto the roof. I took a deep breath, gripped the phone tightly, and dialed Victor's number. The only person besides Maria I still trusted enough to turn to. The only one who had ever seen me not with the pitying gaze reserved for a mother or an old woman, but as a woman, full of flaws, wounds, and a longing to be heard. The phone rang, each ring echoing like heavy thuds of old memories on my heart. Then, a hoarse "hello" came through, so familiar I almost cried. Still that deep, gravelly voice, like a smoldering cigarette, but with the warmth of a winter hearth. I was flustered, a lump in my throat. It took me a few seconds to manage. "It's me, Eleanor. Do you remember me?" The other end was dead silent, a silence that stretched, seemingly longer than the decade we'd been apart. I could even hear the wind whistling outside, carried through the receiver, and my own heart beating heavy, anxious thumps. Then he slowly replied, "Of course, I remember. How have you been?" I let out a small laugh, as if to release some tension. Then, I began to tell him everything I'd buried in my heart for years, about Michael, about Dr. Hayes, about the pills, of unknown origin, about Maria's trembling, which I believed wasn't just due to old age but something far more sinister. I spoke slowly, not omitting any detail, because I understood that if I held anything back, I might just quietly disappear without anyone knowing. Victor didn't interrupt me. He waited until I finished before saying a single sentence. "I'm listening." Just that, and my heart felt like it had been unburdened, half its weight lifted. Someone was listening. Someone believed me. Someone was willing to stand by me. For me, that was enough to keep living. After that, we arranged to meet, not at the cafe under the trellised flowers like in the old days, no passionate gazes or roses tucked in my hair. We met at a small diner near County General Hospital, stainless steel tables, red plastic chairs, the air thick with exhaust fumes. He arrived first, still tall and lean as before, more gray in his hair, but his eyes were still sharp, and his presence as solid as ever. We didn't hug, just a handshake, like two old soldiers, once comrades in arms, now reunited on a new battlefield. We ate meatloaf and mashed potatoes, spoke softly, each sentence deliberate, as if planning a course of action. No longer romantic dreams, but allies, standing on the same side of the line. I told him about my dream from years ago, the dream Victor and I had once sketched out together, the new urban center, a large, ambitious project. Back then, when everything was still on paper, I had to let it all go because my children were too young. Because my mother-in-law fell ill and was bedridden, I put my career on hold, put my aspirations aside. Victor never uttered a word of blame, only said gently, "You did the right thing then, but now, you need to do the right thing again, and this time, for yourself." I could only nod. This time, I didn't want to turn my back on my dreams or my true self anymore. Victor helped me reconnect with Dr. Logan, the one who had treated me since my younger days, and he was still the same, white coat, soft voice, calm eyes that made you feel protected. But this time, it wasn't at the public hospital, but a private clinic, discreet, my name not in any record book. I brought the pills I had been secretly saving, furtively, like hiding evidence in a stranger's house. Dr. Logan took them, examined, each one carefully under a magnifying glass, his brow furrowed, then asked sternly, "How long have you been taking this?" I replied, "About 2 months since Michael started taking me to the new doctor." He made no comment, just quietly wrote a script for a series of tests, blood, liver, heart, neurological. 3 days later, the results came back. It wasn't heart failure, not an inner ear disorder, not neurodegenerative disease, as I had thought. I was being poisoned. Specifically, I was being given continuous small doses of anticholinergic and sedative drugs, a type that, if misused or taken long-term, would cause gradual confusion, hand tremors, and temporary memory loss. Like a slow, gnawing away at the mind, I sat there, stunned, the test results cold in my hand. All my vague suspicions now had a name, a face, a basis. It was no longer a nebulous fear, but the raw, clear, heart-stabbing truth. Victor looked at me, his gaze calm but his voice firm. "From now on, you can't be there alone. We'll find a way." I didn't burst into tears, nor did I scream like in a soap opera. I just took a deep breath, a breath that felt like it shattered the fragile shell they had forced me into. I knew this moment was the first step on a journey to truly live, not just to exist silently as a mother on the verge of death. They thought I had broken, that I would quietly fade away in the very house I had built. But they were wrong. I had called the man who was once the love of my life, and now the only person I could trust implicitly, like a comrade in arms in a battle I couldn't afford to lose. Never in my 75 years did I imagine I'd have to live like two people, in one body, one side, my true self, lucid, clear-headed, step by step trying to hold on to life, the other, a mask I'd fashioned, trembling, muddled, like an old woman whose memory was gone, just waiting for her time. But from the day I knew I was being poisoned, I understood that if I wanted to live to turn this game around, I couldn't be real. I had to play a role, not a theatrical role from when my husband was alive, but a role in real life, where there was no applause, only prying eyes waiting for you to slip so they could bury you. So, I began to act, the most expensive role of my life. Returning home, I deliberately slowed my steps, my limbs seemingly out of control, my words sometimes remembered, sometimes forgotten, speaking and laughing absently. "Oh, what day is it today?" Or, "Have the kids eaten yet?" My gaze drifted out the window as if my mind were somewhere in the past. Once, Michael walked in. I looked at him carefully and asked innocently, "Oh, are you Michael's friend, dear?" He chuckled, his voice sickeningly sweet. "Mom, you're getting old. A little forgetfulness is normal." But I read his eyes perfectly, not a hint of shock or worry, but a chilling reassurance. Like a predator, certain its prey was snared, unable to escape. Every morning, when Michael brought the pills, I played my part perfectly, took the glass of water, pretended to put the pill in my mouth, tilted my head back as if swallowing, then smiled and said, "Mommy took her medicine, see, aren't I good?" As soon as he turned away, I'd silently used my tongue to push the pill under my gums. I learned that trick from my husband. He was a seasoned stage actor, knew all the tricks of the trade that audiences could never detect. I'd seen him swallow toothpicks, spit out razor blades, feign death on stage, bringing the house down in tears. Now, it was my turn. I'd hold each pill in my mouth for a few minutes, then quietly spit it out, wrap it in a tissue, and pass it to Maria, the most silent and steadfast ally I'd ever had. She'd take it, wrap it carefully, and hide it in a thick book I'd prepared earlier, a heavy Russian novel, so dense no one in the house ever touched it, its insides long hollowed out. The cover was still pristine, arousing no suspicion, while inside, the pills were neatly arranged, like bullets hidden in a book's casing, the silent weapon I was gathering day by day, preparing for a war no one knew was coming. Victor didn't leave me to fight this battle alone. He quietly arranged everything behind the scenes, like a seasoned commander. The first person he called was Mr. Miller, an old acquaintance, a retired homicide detective now working as a private investigator. I met him only once, in Victor's small office, where the stale smell of cigarette smoke still lingered. But Mr. Miller was quiet, a man of few words, neat as a razor's edge. Every word he uttered precise and chilling. After I told him everything, he asked just one question: "Where do you want the cameras?" 4 days later, he was at my house, disguised as an electrician checking the lighting system. Michael was away on business that day. Anna was tied up with work, so it was just me, Maria, and him. In less than 3 hours, the entire camera system was installed. One cleverly hidden in the living room table lamp, another inserted into a ceiling speaker in this study, and an old teddy bear on top of the bookshelf concealed a camera so small no one would suspect. Not a single loose wire, no noise, not a trace left behind. I sat watching the test footage, seeing myself pacing, hands trembling realistically, but only Mr. Miller and I knew that every tremor was calculated, every step part of the script. A week later, we started getting results. On Tuesday night, Michael sat alone in his study, laptop open, making a call. His voice was low, as if afraid of being overheard, but Mr. Miller's recording system picked up every word, every breath. I sat next to Victor in the adjacent room, listening, a chill running down my spine. "Dr. Hayes, it's Michael. My mother's been much weaker lately, more confused than before. Do you think it's time to increase the dosage?" Silence. Then, Dr. Hayes's voice, cold as steel on stone. "Wait a little longer. When she no longer knows who she is, it'll be easier to get the paperwork done." I stared at the screen, My hands clenched so tight they turned white. Victor said nothing, just placed a hand on my shoulder, gentle but firm as a promise. From that day on, the layers of dust covering the truth began to be swept away. Michael secretly opened an offshore bank account under an unfamiliar name. Thanks to Mr. Miller's network, we traced it all. And then the heaviest blow, the house I had designed myself, every brick chosen by me, was being appraised by a real estate agency. He was preparing to sell the house. He was preparing to kick me out of the place I called home. If I hadn't discovered it in time, perhaps in just a few more months, I would have been locked away in some nursing home, my mind foggy, no longer knowing who I was, lying there waiting to die like a nameless person. But now, things are different. Now, I held every bullet in my hand, living proof, pieces of a conspiracy they never thought I'd be strong enough to gather. I no longer felt afraid. My act continued, but I was no longer a supporting character being pushed around. This time, I knew for sure, the audience watching wasn't just them. I had my own stage, the stage of a woman who had been weak-hearted but never broken. And in this play, I would definitely be the one to write the ending, line by line, word by word, as cold and precise as a verdict. I used to think that after all these years as a mother, after all those days of yielding, sacrificing, enduring pain without a word of complaint, swallowing loneliness without ever crying out loud, my children, Michael and Anna, would at least reserve a little something called affection for me. But no, the two children I had carried, birthed, and nurtured since they were tiny infants, ended up setting a trap with their own hands, sophisticated and cruel, hoping I was old enough not to be lucid enough to realize. It was a sweltering day, the breeze from the crack in the door just a teasing whisper. I was resting when Anna came in. She sat down beside me, her voice as gentle as when she was a child, her eyes offering a hint of feigned warmth. But I was no longer the naive mother of yesteryear, easily placated by a hug. She began, "Mom, Michael's about to become a partner at his new firm. We're planning a party to celebrate, and we thought we'd make it a tribute to you as well. What do you think?" I looked at her, feigning emotion, my lips trembling, uttering phrases like, "I can't believe you kids still remember me like this." But deep down, I knew this party wasn't for me. I was just a living backdrop, a prop that could move, for Michael, to construct his image as a filial son, repaying his aging mother. They were building a meticulously crafted stage, and I, as always, was the pawn pushed to the center of the board. The invitations clearly read, honoring legendary architect Eleanor Vance, heavily promoted on social media, with press invited to take photos, film, and write articles. But in reality, I knew this was just a publicity stunt, turning me into a rusty medal for Michael's title as the brilliant successor. I didn't react. I let them prepare, print invitations, book tables, set up backdrops, check lights, microphones, and rehearse tearful speeches like a pre-written script. But this time, I was the one holding the curtain pull. I proactively called Victor. We met at a small cafe in a quiet alley, the upstairs mezzanine discreet and private. Victor sat across from me, his gaze sharp as a razor, listening silently, needing a few words. Maria came too, carrying her old, worn handbag stuffed with a thick file. Jessica, a woman in her 40s, wearing a white blouse, her hair tied back neatly, her gaze sharp and cold, a lawyer who had also served as a prosecutor, was also present. She was an acquaintance of Mr. Miller, having cracked cases that seemed unsolvable. No one said much. Jessica opened her briefcase, placing each document on the table. Images of Michael's signing power of attorney to transfer the house, the recording of him calling Dr. Hayes about the medication, video clips from the camera showing suspicious activities in the study, even statements from the offshore bank account in a stranger's name, where he had begun to secretly transfer assets. Each piece of evidence was a knife. I plunged back into the model son persona he'd tried so hard to build, and I knew, this time, I would be the one writing the script for the finale. "This time, we're not just catching him in the act of poisoning," Jessica said, her voice clear, each word landing like a hammer on the table. "But we also have enough evidence for premeditated property theft, by secretly poisoning a relative to gain inheritance rights. The legal team will be at the party, blended in with the guests. When I give the signal, everything will begin." Victor nodded silently, while I gently squeezed the still steaming coffee cup, feeling as if I were holding a small gun, preparing to step onto a dark battlefield. I wasn't trembling, but my heart felt heavy as stone. Not from fear, but from sadness, a suffocating sadness at the thought that the people I had once held in my arms, sung to sleep each night, wiped away their tears when they fell, were the very ones callously pushing me to the brink. They were once my whole world, my motivation to live, to sacrifice my youth, and now I had to stand on the opposing side, against my own flesh and blood. But that sadness didn't make me falter. It only made me stronger, calmer, clearer about what I needed to do, not out of anger, nor for revenge, but because I didn't want to die in silence. I wanted to live, a life truly lived, not just existing as the shadow of a mother stripped of her dignity, memory, and sanity. That evening, I sat alone in my room again, by the soft yellow lamplight, opening the speech they had prepared, filled with hollow phrases like, "Mom is always proud of you," or, "Thank you for being with Mom in her final days." They thought I would obediently hold that paper and read it before the crowd. I would still hold it, but not to read their false praises. I would read the truth, a bitter truth, but one that needed to be spoken under the lights, before the cameras, and hundreds of eyes. I looked at myself in the mirror, saw an old woman with gray hair, wrinkled skin, but whose gaze had never lost its fire. I whispered to myself, "They may set the stage, but you're the one with the power to bring down the curtain." And I knew the trap they had set turned out to be the path for me to step into the light, to say all the things I had once silently swallowed. I walked into the banquet hall wearing an elegant, hand-embroidered white gown, my hair coiffed neatly, my lips touched with a subtle, deep red. I walked slowly, but my back was straight, my gaze sharp as scissors. No longer the image of a confused, dazed mother they had arranged, but a woman who had been pushed to the depths of betrayal, now stepping into the spotlight to reclaim her honor, her voice, her very self. When I entered, the entire room seemed to fall silent, the air thick with attention like a taut string. I immediately saw the blatant confusion in Michael's eyes. My son, who thought he was so clever, thought he'd led his mother into his trap so smoothly, now stood frozen like a wooden statue, his hand trembling so much the wine in his glass sloshed, nearly spilling onto his suit. He tried to salvage the situation, regain his composure, forced a strained smile, and said, "This is my mother, Eleanor Vance, also the guest of honor at tonight's tribute. I am incredibly grateful to my mother, who inspired me to build the career I have today." I saw several reporters aiming their cameras, no doubt hired by them to perfectly paint the image of the filial son. I had written this script before, directed it even, only this time I was the character being used as a backdrop. But I knew very well, in any play, the power to determine the ending always lies with the one who understands the script best. The MC, microphone in hand, enthusiastically invited me to the podium. I walked each step firm, like the very bricks I had laid in the house of my life, solid, intentional, unwavering. Hundreds of eyes followed me, among them expectant gazes hoping I would open my mouth to thank them, to acknowledge my son's merits, to willingly retreat backstage like a content old mother. But I stood tall, gripped the microphone, smiled faintly, and then said, "I am here tonight not to offer thanks, but to say goodbye, not goodbye to life, but goodbye to those who orchestrated this performance with the intent of ushering me into oblivion." A murmur rippled through the room, whispers rising like an undercurrent. Michael's face turned pale. Anna frowned, her expression clearly changing. I maintained my smile, my gaze fixed forward, my voice steady. "On the occasion of tonight's party, I would like to announce the establishment of the Eleanor Vance Foundation, an organization to support elderly women without family, and I officially appoint Ms. Maria Rodriguez as its executive director. Furthermore, I am honored to reintroduce the new Urban Center project, a dream I once had to abandon for my family, which is now officially being relaunched under my own investment and direction, Eleanor Vance. This project will not include Michael's name, nor is it for anyone lacking ethics and conscience." I gave a subtle signal. The large screen behind me lit up. From the guest seats, Jessica, the prosecutor, walked onto the stage, her demeanor decisive, her eyes sharp as a scalpel, a file in her hand. Her voice rang out, articulate, so cold it seemed to freeze the entire hall. "What follows is evidence pertaining to the poisoning and attempted misappropriation of assets belonging to Mrs. Eleanor Vance, perpetrated by her two biological children, Michael Vance and Anna Vance." The screen behind me began to display the evidence. Piece by piece, An audio recording of Anna's voice saying, "Mom's losing it. Just get her to sign over the will to me, and it'll be done." Copies of offshore bank account statements in Michael's name showing illicit transactions, and finally, the fatal blow, a video clip from a hidden camera showing Dr. Hayes covertly giving Michael medication in the packing garage, the dim lighting still clear enough to identify everyone, and the woman pushed into the role of a backdrop, now stood tall in the spotlight, holding the microphone like a sword, no longer acting, but speaking the truth. The entire room was plunged into a thick silence, as if the air itself had frozen from the force of the blow against the elaborately painted mask worn for so many years. The complexions of the guests gradually turned pale. A few prominent investors began to whisper, exchanging suspicious glances. Some said nothing, just quietly put down their wine glasses, shook their heads, and stood up to leave, as if wanting no part of the mess that had just been exposed. Anna suddenly shot up, her voice trembling as if about to cry, her eyes darting around. "It was Michael's idea, Mom. I didn't know anything, I swear." I looked at her, the daughter who used to hug me every morning, smiling innocently like an angel, now selling out her own brother to grasp at some hope of survival. But I wasn't surprised. I had anticipated this when I began this war, where the opponents weren't strangers, but my own children. The recordings continued to play, each word a knife stripping away the veneer of false morality, every shameless conversation. Michael's voice calculating an increased dosage, Anna's voice agreeing to sign the power of attorney, both discussing selling the house as if I were already dead. All masks fell. Michael screamed, his voice cracking, pointing at me like a desperate man. "You're making this up. You're insane." I didn't get angry, just calmly picked up the microphone, looked straight at him, my voice so clear no one could doubt it. "No, son, I've never been more lucid." I saw the people who had shaken Michael's hand, who had raised glasses with him, now silently turning their backs, one by one retreating from the banquet tables as if avoiding a disaster. No goodbyes, not a single regretful glance. They left, taking with them the trust they once had in Michael, leaving him standing alone in the brightly lit room, where no one wanted to look at him anymore. His lips moved as if trying to say something, but no one cared to listen. And me, I still stood there, amidst all those eyes, head held high, not crying, not trembling. Because tonight was not the day I was buried as they had planned, but the day I was reborn, stronger, more radiant, and more transparent than ever before. I once thought that after that party, Michael would disappear from my life like an exposed nightmare, but I was wrong. Exactly 1 week later, he came back to the house, no more expensive suits, no more confident smile of someone who thought he held the world in his hands. Before me stood a haggard man, emaciated, unshaven, with deep-set eyes, his posture shrunken as if he'd just crawled out of ruins. He lurked outside the gate, not daring to ring the bell. Maria ran in to tell me. I just nodded. Let him in. I sat in the living room, same old chair, same old table. But the me of today was no longer the mother of yesterday, ready to forgive all transgressions. Michael walked in, head bowed, and sat down, not daring to look me in the eye. It took him a long time to speak, his voice hoarse. Mom, ... We're still family, aren't we? How could you do this to me? I didn't laugh, nor did I get angry. I just looked at him, my eyes devoid of love, devoid of resentment, just the gaze of someone who had weathered storms, who had seen through the depths of human nature, as if looking at a stranger who had once strayed into my life. I looked straight into Michael's eyes and asked, my voice as calm as a lake after a storm, when you were giving me that medicine, when you were secretly plotting to take everything from me, did you think about the word family then? He didn't answer, his lips trembled, his face as white as paper. Then he started to stammer, words tumbling over each other, trying to deflect responsibility, blaming Anna for instigating, Dr. Hayes for threatening, work pressure, financial hardship, things that seemed objective but were merely excuses to cover up his cruelty. I said nothing more, didn't argue, didn't scream like betrayed mothers in soap operas. I just sat there, silently observing him, the son who once lay snugly in my arms, who was once my pride, my entire world. I looked at him carefully, as if to etch into my memory for the last time the face that had once softened my heart, so that, from this day forward, I would no longer recognize him. I spoke, each word clear, like sharp knife strokes cutting into the space between us. There's nothing left for you here. No house, no money, no honor. He started to open his mouth to protest, but I cut him off with a final sentence, no longer the words of a mother, but of someone who had loved deeply, now speaking with the clarity of a person who had just awakened from a deceptive dream. From now on, we are no longer mother and son, we are plaintiff and defendant, just as you chose your role. Michael burst into tears, his tears falling as they had many times before, but this time, I didn't raise my hand to wipe them, no comforting, no gentle words, as there once were when he was little. I sat there, still, not because my heart had turned to stone, but because I understood that some wounds should not be left to fester. They must be cut cleanly, so that one's life doesn't rot any further. When he left the house, I stepped out, onto the porch, took a long, deep breath. The Chicago sky that day wasn't scorching, nor was it raining, just quiet, like a sigh from the heavens. I stood there for a moment, then turned back inside, not letting tears fall, not looking back. I returned to the things awaiting me: work, a new life, plans rearranged like the blueprints I once painstakingly revised down to the smallest detail. Next week, the first batch of students receiving scholarships from the Eleanor Vance Foundation would enter university, beginning their journeys. A few had already emailed their thanks. One even carefully sketched my portrait in pencil. The lines, still clumsy but full of emotion. I sat alone in my study, opening each letter, looking at each drawing, my heart suddenly warming, not because of praise or adulation, but because I knew, very clearly, that I could still give, and that, forever, would never be meaningless. I attended the first meeting for the new Urban Center project. In a room full of new faces, enthusiastic young engineers, experienced architects, shrewd first-time investors, everything around me was new, modern, but what stirred within me was something very old, a primal passion, untarnished by time or trauma. I picked up my pen, drew the first lines on a clean white sheet of paper, my heart fluttering like the day I first sketched the small house for my husband and 2 children when we were struggling to make ends meet. But this time, I wasn't drawing to build a home for my old family, but to build a new future for myself, for what I believed was right. I didn't hold on to what had betrayed me, didn't cling to things no longer worthy of being in my life. What I chose to carry forward was clarity, the justice I had fought for, and faith, not in anyone else, but in myself. The past events, the people who had left, I didn't try to erase or bury. I left them behind like stones paving a road, hard, cold, but not obstacles, just reminders of what I had overcome, because I knew the rest of my life, whether long or short, vibrant or peaceful, would be a time I would live authentically, no longer playing a role, no longer straining to please anyone. In mid-March, I moved into my new house. That morning, the sky wasn't harsh. The wind blew just enough to gently stir my hair, like a whisper of freedom. The house was much smaller than the old mansion, which had held so many memories and schemes. Once a home, then a trap that nearly cost me my identity. But for me, a house doesn't need to be large. It just needs to be enough for one person to live truly, without bowing her head, without watching for anyone's gaze. I designed this house myself from start to finish. A window to catch the morning sun, steps leading up to the porch, a cozy kitchen with a cross breeze just as I wanted, bookshelves within easy reach, every detail proclaiming this was my own world. No one told me to choose a paint color suitable for my age. No one forced me to hang feng shui paintings or move my bed for good orientation. Every morning I cooked a simple meal for myself. Every evening I read or relaxed in my wicker chair, watching the yellow light fall on the rough brick wall I'd deliberately left unpainted. In this house, there were no hidden lies, no lurking control, only me, and the one thing I had spent a lifetime fighting to regain, freedom. One twilight evening, as I was watering the potted plants on the porch, Jessica called with news. The new urban center had officially broken ground. A few days later, the media started reporting, each outlet calling me something different. Some wrote veteran architect, others likened me to a queen of reconstruction, and one website ran the headline, "The Woman Who Found Her Life Again." I read it, feeling no smugness, nor amusement. I just nodded, because it was true. I had found my life again, not through others' praise, but from each gentle, full, fearless breath I took every morning in the house I had built myself, with hands and a heart that had been through fire. The groundbreaking ceremony for the project took place in a simple yet dignified atmosphere, on a construction site still dusty with earth. I wore a soft, ivory-colored gown, standing before engineers, workers, and young people who had been with me since their first fledgling steps in the profession. Their eyes looked at me not with hollow admiration, but with deep trust. I didn't speak at length, didn't raise my voice or use flowery words. I just stood tall, smiled, and said one single sentence: I used to create designs for others. Now, I am redesigning my own life. Applause erupted like a wave, but the sound that resonated deepest within me was my own heartbeat, steady, strong, and strangely alive, as if each beat affirmed I was still living with all my soul and body. Not long after, the Eleanor Vance Foundation held its second scholarship award ceremony. I attended not to give a speech or be the center of attention, but simply as the silent founder standing behind the scenes. The person at the microphone was Maria, the woman who once only knew how to stoop and clean floors, now the executive director of the foundation. She wore a modest, dark-colored dress, her hair tied back neatly, her eyes still kind as ever, but now with an added firmness of someone who knew her own worth. When she spoke before the crowd, I instinctively clenched my hands, not out of nervousness, but emotion. I used to be the one cleaning floors in a family I considered my home. Today, I stand here to offer hope to women who no longer have a home to return to. Her simple words struck a chord deep in my heart, causing tears to fall for the first time after all those months of stoic endurance, not from pain, not from resentment, but from faith, because I knew there were people, like me, like Maria, who had been crushed but still deserved to rise from the ashes. That afternoon, when I returned to my small, quiet house, where I had chosen every brick myself, I found an envelope slipped under the door. No sender's name, but the handwriting was all too familiar. It was Anna's. I opened it. A handwritten letter, on lightly scented paper, neat script, beginning with, "I was wrong, Mom. Please forgive me. I truly regret it. I miss you so much." I read it carefully, just once. No anger, no pain, nor did I feel relief or joy. I folded it, no tears, no torment. Then I went to the kitchen, opened the incinerator, and dropped the letter in. The small flame consumed every sycophantic, insincere word, every apology written not from genuine remorse, but from fear of losing something. A thin wisp of smoke rose, leaving nothing but an emptiness I no longer needed to fill. I didn't write back, nor did I keep any piece of paper, because not everyone deserves forgiveness, especially when they try to kill you not with knives, but with cold, silent, prolonged actions like rust eating away at the core. I didn't live to offer chances to those who had deliberately worn me down. I lived to move forward, to build, to not betray myself again. And I understood, happiness doesn't come from having someone by your side, but from the feeling of being yourself, living for what you believe in, and keeping your heart true to yourself. I came back to life, not by any miracle, but by steely determination, a clear mind, and a heart that had been tattered but never stopped beating. And that, truly, was the second time in my life I truly lived. Exactly 1 year from the day everything was exposed, I decided to visit Michael in prison, not to forgive, certainly not because there was any lingering familial bond to salvage or mend, but to see firsthand the consequences of his actions, to witness what remained of a person when they had single-handedly destroyed everything, when the false veneer was stripped away under the cold, bang-like white light. The correctional facility was nearly a 2-hour drive from the city. I didn't tell Maria, didn't tell anyone, brought nothing but myself and a resolute heart. This was a confrontation I had to face alone, with no one accompanying me, no flashing camera lights, no legal system or media backing me up. I walked into the visitation room. The fluorescent lights overhead were harsh and cold, illuminating the stained tile floor. The air was thick with the smell of dampness. The room held only 2 faded plastic chairs and a worn-out glass partition in the middle. Like an invisible line dividing 2 worlds, on one side, me, the survivor, on the other, him, the one who once called me mother. A few minutes later, Michael was led out, his steps slow, head bowed, hands cuffed in front of him. The oversized prison uniform made him look pathetically small. The arrogance he once displayed had vanished without a trace, leaving only a shell of a man with downcast, sunken, weary eyes. If I hadn't looked closely at those eyes, I wouldn't have recognized him. He sat down in the chair opposite me, silent, as if waiting for me to speak, but he was the one who broke the silence. His voice raspy, Did you come here to laugh at me, Mom? I remained calm, looked straight into his eyes, and replied succinctly, no, I came to close this chapter. He let out a bitter laugh, his lips trembling as if trying to suppress a sob. So you're satisfied then? You won. I shook my head slightly, my gaze unwavering. This isn't about winning or losing. This is about consequences. You did this. You have to face it. I don't hate you, but there's nothing left to hold on to either. He leaned back, sighed, his voice shattering like a wineglass dropped on the floor. I know you hate me, but still, still your son. I leaned forward, emphasizing each word like nails hammered into rotten wood. When you forced me to take those pills, when you plotted to sell the house behind my back, when you secretly opened offshore accounts to transfer money, did you ever once think whose son you were then? He was silent for a long time. Then he just nodded, not an admission of guilt, but because there was nothing left to justify. I looked at him one last time, my gaze closing a chapter of my life, then said very slowly, very clearly, now, we are no longer mother and son. We are plaintiff and defendant, just as you chose from the very beginning. Michael bit his lip, his eyes red. Then, suddenly buried his head in his hands on the table. A choked sob caught in his throat, and he whispered through his breath, Mom, just one last hug, just once, please. I stood up, my legs a little shaky but still steady, and walked out of the room without looking back. Behind me was the slumped figure, sobbing in broken gasps, but it could no longer pull anything from me. A hug now couldn't erase all those years of deceit, couldn't wash away the poisonous pills once handed to me by my own son, and certainly couldn't lighten the heart of a mother who had forgiven more than once, who had held on until the very end, but who now, finally, chose to let go. I walked out of the visitation room, leaving behind the little boy who used to cling to me in the night, afraid of ghosts, who used to demand I feed him soup when he was sick. Now, there was only a man slumped in a prison uniform, and a mother whose feelings for him had died long ago. In the prison yard, the afternoon sun warmed my shoulders. I took a breath, not deep, not rushed, just enough to keep living, with everything I had left, a clear mind, a new design, and a life with no room for traitors. I returned to my new building, home to the Eleanor Vance Foundation, the design team for the new urban center, and also where I lived. I went up to the rooftop. The wind blew strong, ruffling my hair. From up high, the city below looked like an unfinished blueprint waiting for a correcting hand. I stood on the rooftop, hands on the railing, and whispered to myself, I once stood on the brink of death, betrayed by the very person I gave life to. But I chose to rise up and redesign my life. And that is the most beautiful project I've ever undertaken. I was no longer a woman living for others. No longer a mother unrewarded. I was a person living a second time, living with reason, with boundaries, with faith, but faith in myself. That night, back in my room, I wrote the final entry in the notebook that had accompanied me for the past 2 years, where I'd recorded everything that happened, every strange pill, every suspicious glance, every painful decision. It's never too late to start over, as long as you have the courage. I closed the notebook, put it in a drawer, and went to make a cup of tea. At that moment, I knew all the cuts had healed, and my life, even in its later stages, could still be a beautiful creation if I was the one redrawing the design. Life, if it sometimes plunges to the depths, can also rise again from that very darkness, as long as you don't surrender. I was betrayed by my own flesh and blood, stood at the boundary between life and letting go, but I didn't choose the end. I chose to begin again, not because I am stronger than anyone else, but because I have a small but persistent belief. It's never too late to start over, as long as you have the courage. Thank you for joining me on this journey, all the way to its final chapter. If this story resonated with you, please hit like, subscribe, and share it to spread the message to anyone out there who might feel lost. I'll see you in the next story.